Hello everyone and welcome to the first YellowDog 3D tips blog. Today we're going to be going over some basics of Matchmoving. Here's the shot that we're going to be tracking. As you can see, there's plenty of features that we can be tracking. There's these poles. It's quite an easy shot to match move, to be honest. So here's the finished match move with the classic YellowDog logo. As you can see, it sticks perfectly to the ground plane, which is what we want. So yeah, the first thing we need to sort out is the lens distortion, and any camera that you shoot with is going to have some distortion. Obviously 3D programs work with perfectly straight lines, there's absolutely no distortion, so we need to undistort our footage so we'll be able to get an accurate camera solve. So here I'm just bringing my footage into Nuke. Here's my source footage, which is my clip that I'm going to be tracking. I've also shot this grid. This is actually really important. On the day of your shoot, take a grid like this, print it out. All you need to do is film it for a few frames, and this is going to actually pretty much automatically help you undistort the footage afterwards. So all I'm doing is I'm going to add a lens distortion node. I'm just going to go up to the options and go up to grid analysis, select thin line and just click analyze grid, and that's all you've got to do. That has undistorted the footage. All the lines are now completely straight, and all I need to do now is just pipe my source footage through this same node, and that footage is now ready to just be rendered out and brought into PFTrack. If you didn't shoot one of these grids on the day, there's no need to worry, you can actually do it another way. I don't think it's as accurate, but all you've got to do is add in a lens distortion node. Instead of clicking grid analysis, you can click line analysis and just scrub through your footage and find some areas that are supposed to be straight. So I'm just looking at this roof here. I'm going to turn drawing mode on, and I'm just left clicking to add points. You need a minimum of 3 points. So you can just left click, and then right click to finish the line. So just drawing with left click and finishing the line with right click. Try and get a good amount of these lines on, obviously the more the better. And when you finish, you can just click analyze lines, and this will de-warp your footage in the exact same way that the grid warp did. This way obviously it isn't quite as accurate as the grid analysis method, but it does work and I've used it before, no problems. So now I'm just rendering out the footage as a target sequence, which will work perfectly with PFTrack. You can actually do practically the same thing with After Effects, however it's not as accurate. With this method you've basically got to just judge straight lines with your eyes. It's nowhere near as accurate, but all you need to do is add a grid overlay on, get an optics compensation effect on your footage, and just bring that field of view value up until you feel as though the lines are all straight in the footage. Obviously this way isn't totally accurate and you're basically just doing it off your best judgment, but it should still work as long as you've got those lines as straight as possible. So we're ready to go over to PFTrack. So I'm just creating a new project. I'm just going to call this one track 1. Very exciting. You can import your footage into PFTrack by either using the Explorer here or just dragging and dropping it onto the middle pane, and then you can drag it onto the work area on the very left. So here's my footage imported in. The first thing that you want to be doing is setting up your frame rate. It's best to do this at the start because it can actually cause you problems later. So in order to get a good camera solve, we want to be doing manual track points, and to do those we use a user track node. User tracks are just 2D tracks, just like the ones that you use in After Effects or any other program. So to start using the user tracks, you just need to right click your footage and go to user track. So right now I'm just looking through the footage for features which stay in the shot for a long period of time. Obviously the longer something stays in the shot, the better it will be for tracking. So I've got these points on the fence. So yeah, I'm just going to create a track, and I'm going to stick one just around this sort of signpost on the fence. I'm going to get it to a point where there's no motion blur on it and start tracking it forwards. As you can see, it's doing a pretty good job of tracking it. You can see the accuracy of it in this little window. So yeah, I'm just going to let that run through to the end. So now I'm just going to go back to the original starting point of my track and just track it backwards. I did this because I didn't want to start on a point that had a lot of motion blur, because it's a bit too difficult to see the exact position of something when it's really blurred. So I've just skipped on a little bit. As you can see, I've tracked the cone in the back of the shot. So now I'm just going to create a tracker at the top of this shot. Obviously, just like any 2D tracker you're going to be using, the inner box is the search window, and the outer box is the search range. The bigger both of these are, the longer it's going to take to track. So I'm just going to track this backwards from the starting position again. As you can see, this one actually goes off shot, like it ends. So we can't have this. Obviously it being stuck there is going to mess the track up, so we're just going to click the hide minus button, and that's just going to hide it and make it only appear when it's on screen. So using the same hide principle, we're going to just deal with this little point here. Obviously he walks in front of this point, which means it's going to mess up the track for those moments. So I'm going to go back to just before the point gets messed up. I'm going to remove the key first, and I'm just going to click the hide plus button. So it's going to hide all of the track points in front of this point in the timeline. And now I can actually just scrub through the footage until the point where this point reappears. So here we go, we can see the point again. Now I'm just going to click the track 1 frame forward button, and this will make the tracker reappear. So as you can see, it disappears for the range which I hid it for, and now because I've tracked it 1 frame forward, we get to see the tracker again. I've just realigned that and carried on tracking. So once you've finished all your manual track points, you should have a window which looks like this. Try and get as many manual tracks in as possible, because these are going to be the basis of your whole match move. 10 to 15 is usually good. The longer they stay on screen for, the better. And I would say at a minimum you need about 5 manual track points on screen at any one time. So the next thing we're going to do is add a auto track pass, and to do this you actually need to mask out all moving objects in your scene. So in this case I've actually got someone walking, so that actually needs to be taken care of. So all I'm going to do is create an ellipse, and actually because we're in a tracking suite you can just track the mask forward and backwards. It's going to do a pretty decent job. Obviously at parts things will start to pop out of the mask. Just stop the track, you can adjust it manually, get all the points back in, and then just carry on tracking it. I'm just going to do this for the whole shot. Obviously this is just a rough mask, it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. So here you can see the finished thing. I've done it till the end of the footage. As you can see, the person walking doesn't leave the purple mask, which is what we want. But also in this footage we have a lot of trees and foliage. It's quite a windy day, so all this small subtle movement that you get because of the wind are going to throw the camera solve out. So I'm just going to mask around all of this area. This is just a mask which you can just keyframe like any other mask in any program. So I'm just moving through the timeline. If you press Control you can move the whole mask at once. So I'm just going to go through the whole range of the footage and make sure that all of these trees remain inside of the purple mask. So once this is complete we can actually start setting up the parameters for our auto track. So I'm just going to change the candidate number to 80. I'm going to change the target number to 60, and this is the number of track points which the software is going to aim to apply to the footage. Window size is just the inner search box which we talked about earlier. Default is fine for this. The search range I'm just going to leave as 54. Obviously the higher these numbers the longer the track's going to take. The minimum length value is actually really important for a shot like this. Where you've got really fast camera movements you want to have quite a low minimum length. This is basically the minimum length of time in frames that a track point will have to exceed before it's actually accepted as a proper track. So I'm just going to put this as 8 because I've got quite fast camera movements. The higher you can put this the better. If you're using camera equipment like a dolly or a jib, you're going to be able to put a much higher value for this, as track points are going to stay on screen for a much longer period of time. Failure threshold is the threshold of accuracy which the track point must exceed for it to be accepted as a proper track. 0.7 is the default, and I feel that that's quite low in most cases, so I'm just going to put this up to 0.9, which is the value I usually use. The feature scale depends entirely on your footage. If you're tracking something with big feature points, sort of big areas of contrast, you would use large. If you're tracking something such as a field of grass with really small feature points, you would set this as small. You can see down at the bottom we've got these few tick boxes. If you've done a user track, like in our case, it's a good idea to keep guide ticked. This will use your user tracks as a guide for the auto tracks, which means a higher degree of accuracy. So I'm just going to let this run through, and here you have it, the final thing. We've got a lot of solid tracks. So the next thing we're going to add is a camera solver. You can set the focal length if this is known, but Because we did the optics compensation, this actually usually changes the value of this, so you're going to have to do a bit of maths, but by clicking unknown, you're actually just telling the software to take a guess at this value, and I actually find it does a really good job of this. Something I like to add is the translation smooth. I just like to put this to low, and the rotation smooth. This just gets away of any shakiness you're going to have in your footage. Here you can obviously look at how the trackers are going to be affecting the track. All of the user tracks that we did are going to be hard tracks, which means the computer will try and keep these points exactly where they should be, but the auto tracks, it puts as soft tracks. This is because the user tracks tend to be a lot more accurate than the auto tracks, and it allows the auto tracks to just slide around slightly and keep the user tracks exactly where they should be in 3D space. So once we've set all this up, I'm just going to click solve, and here is our camera solve. Everything is sticking pretty perfectly. If you have points which are sliding around and you feel like they're going to mess the track up, you can just go into the trackers tab, unclick active on that tracker after you've selected it, and solve the camera again. So here we go. So now from the looks of things, we've got a really solid track. So the next thing to do is actually set our origin. To do this, you can just select any track point from the viewing window and just click on set origin. So now to get a better idea of how accurate the track is, we can just click this horizontal split button and look at our track in 3D space. The thing to look out for here is how uniformly spread out the small points are on the camera path line. These are actually the camera keyframes. From the looks of things, these are pretty uniformly spread out, they look pretty perfect. You can scrub through the timeline and look at the camera move that you actually did in real life. The next thing I'm going to do is just orient the scene correctly. To do this, we just right click and add an Orient Scene node. The easiest way to do this, although it might not be the most accurate way, is to just go to the rotate tool and just get this grid aligned by eye, just match up your perspective lines. This isn't the most accurate way to do this, but it is very quick and it gives you pretty much the result that we want. So now I'm just going to add in a test object, which is just a bit of geometry to test whether your track is accurate or not. So I'm just adding a thumbtack. I've just clicked add to scene, and I've just clicked on any point, and it just adds in a thumbtack wherever you click. So I'm just trying out a few different points, and to me it looks very accurate, and I'm happy with that. I'm just going to delete that. So the next thing I'm going to do is add in a little bit of image modeling. This allows you to build in some geometry which can be imported into your 3D package later, which will help you position wherever you want to put your 3D objects. So I'm just going to choose the little points tool and click connect, and this will allow you to just connect a few points together. And that's just stuck in the scene, and it will give me a reference point for where I place my objects in 3D later. So I'm actually just going to delete that because I feel like a box is probably a better reference object for where I'm going to position my 3D objects. So here's the box. I'm just going to click the move icon, and this will allow me to move the box from a vertex. So I'm just going to select this bottom corner and align it with the bottom of this grid because I feel like it's a good reference point. I'm actually just going to scale this up a little bit because it's gone a bit too far away. It looks smaller on screen. So I'm just lining this bottom corner up with the grid. And now if I scrub through the timeline to a point where it's drifted out from its position and just realign it, it's going to, as you can see in the 3D window, start to position it properly in 3D space where it should be. And this takes away a lot of the work afterwards. You don't have to worry about whether or not your 3D objects are in the correct place. I like to just do quite a few reference points, make sure it's definitely in the right place before I settle with it. So that's aligned perfectly with the ground plane, and let's have a scrub through the footage, and it seems to stick there absolutely perfectly, so this will be a great reference point. So now I'm just going to right click my image modeling node and click export. My preferred format is actually the Autodesk FBX format. It seems to work very well with all the packages. You can apply some scaling here if you want to the scene. As you can see, it's going to export all the trackers, it's going to export our box, and yep, so it's ready to export. So once we've done that, here I've just jumped over to Cinema 4D. You can just drag that FBX file straight in, set your frame rate up, so here we go, and you'll see that it's brought in the camera with the geometry, so I can scrub through, and that's exactly the movement that we had inside of PFTrack. Something interesting to note is that if you change the scale of this in Cinema 4D, it keeps the exact same camera solve. This will not affect it because it's all grouped under the scene node. I translate this around, like move it around and rotate it, and this will not affect the camera solve whatsoever. This is really useful for when we're matching the camera solve to a pre-built 3D scene or set. So then the thing to do is set up a background, which is your image sequence or your source footage, undistorted obviously. Setting up a background like this is actually really useful. It helps you visualize whether or not your camera solve is matched to your footage correctly, and just really helps you see whether or not things are going to composite together afterwards correctly. So here I've got an empty Maya scene. That same FBX file can just be dropped onto it, and we can just look through that camera really quickly. And as you can see, it's just read the camera. We can look at it exactly the same as we did in Cinema 4D. And here is it with the background, pretty much the exact same setup we had in Cinema 4D. And this is just using the exact same FBX file. I hope this tutorial has been useful for you. I hope you've learnt the basics of camera solving. And here is just the final composite I did again, just to show you the camera solve and how well everything is sticking together. If you found this useful and you learnt something, please stay tuned, because we're going to be doing these kind of video logs once a month, and we're going to be covering many of the different techniques which are used all the time in the animation and VFX pipeline. Thanks.